Hello, Brad Shelke here at Conversations with Mormons. This is part 3 of Knowing My Enemy. Mormons aren't my enemy as they're all potential friends. My only enemy is the father of the lie. Last week I mentioned that the slanderer always uses his one lie to entice me away from the truth that Jesus Christ is all of life for me. His goal is to get me to be self-righteous. I'm not his only target. He also uses this ploy on every Mormon I'm privileged to meet. In episode 8, I mentioned buying the slanderer's lie twice in recent conversations with two seemingly intellectual Mormons. They weren't my problem. My pride was. Why is my pride a problem in witnessing to Mormons? Last week I mentioned that the Apostle Paul says that the enemy counterfeits righteousness and uses that as his tool of deception. In the same context, Paul declares his great concern for Christians. He fears that as the serpent deceived Eve by his cunning, so Christians might somehow get deceived to forget the simplicity and purity they have in Christ. What does Paul mean by simplicity and purity? Jesus' brother James says the wisdom of God is indeed first pure. Pure means free from any adulteration or pollution. James and Paul use the word pure to mean morally flawless. This makes life simple because moral flawlessness exists in the universe only in Jesus Christ. Here's how this works in practice. After stumbling in conversation with one of those two confident and seemingly intellectual Mormons, I prayed often for the one I spoke with at the free book table to come back for more conversation. He did. I kept praying in that second conversation to stay focused on simplicity and purity. In the first conversation, he made some informational comment about his religion. I took the bait, and we talked at a safe informational level. My pride liked that, and I suspect his did too. Because my pride craves credit, I feel pressure to avoid simplicity. This makes it embarrassing to talk about simplicity with a man studying physics and philosophy. In the second conversation, I kept to simple first-grade questions probing the meaning of his humanity, which is also mine. I knew his pride, like mine, hated the simplicity of moral flawlessness, so I stayed alert to not let his pride or mine trick us away from this simplicity. When he said we should never do evil, I replied that I didn't meet his expectation because I've done evil. He said he had too, and that only Jesus succeeded at never doing evil. I asked him to measure me by Christ. He minimized my failure, which indicated his pride blocked his understanding of what he just said. I then quoted to him a reserved Mormon student whom I quote often. She said to me, "Sir, I don't want to be offensive, but compared to Jesus Christ, you're a total failure." We both laughed at her words, and as we discussed her words, he slowly relaxed, and then his face lit up in surprise. He said, "That means that Christ is infinite goodness, and compared to his infinite goodness, we are all zero." I replied that means Hitler and I are equally needy, even if my pride doesn't like it. He smiled and said, "But that's the way it is." His pride had been subdued, and he understood the implication of measuring by the simplicity and purity of Christ, by the moral flawlessness of Christ. I've asked many hundred Mormons and dozens of Christians about their experience of specific sins. All have told me that while impatient with someone, they weren't measuring by Christ, by his perfection. And if they had been measuring their own goodness compared to Christ, they wouldn't have gotten impatient. This is what the Christian life is all about, and really moral goodness is all about. Measuring by Christ. And when I measure by Christ, the fruit of God's Spirit naturally and effortlessly flows from my life. But the enemy hates the simplicity and purity of Christ and seeks to trick us with counterfeit righteousness and away from moral flawlessness. When we get tricked, we experience the weariness, the hamster wheel of self-effort. Next, we'll explore further how the enemy seeks to get me to be self-righteous. Until then, why not ponder this Mormon's joyful new insight that he should always measure by the infinite goodness of Christ, and by doing so overcome our pride? And why not join me in thanking God for sending Jesus Christ to die in your place to be your good way to measure life? Welcome to the conversation.